Welcome back to another Reddit readings video. Sit back, relax, and enjoy these personal creepy stories. My wife is perfect, I'm just greedy. At the sight of the lady with soft brown hair, haunting images of my 9-year-old self lying in a puddle of blood clawed their way to the forefront of my mind. I could practically feel the hideous warmth slide along my back as I recalled the way that the red trail slowly spread itself across the kitchen floor like an ink stain. Back in the present, painful tingles raced along my left thigh as the lady eased herself onto the bench alongside me. Before us sat a huge pond filled with ducks, geese, and a few swans. "That's some heat today, huh?" she asked. I pried my bacon sandwich apart to check for maggots. "It's unbelievable." She grabbed a handful of breadcrumbs from her shoulder bag and tossed them onto the ground. Then a flock of noisy birds swarmed over her cream sandals. She glanced in my direction several times before finally saying, "Have we met before? You look sort of familiar. Do you teach at Elm Grove Primary?" "No," I mumbled. "You work on the high street then?" I shook my head. After studying my face more closely, she said, "Are you feeling okay? You look a little flush." "Just tired is all." "What's your name?" "Michael," I answered, then immediately kicked myself. Wasn't there a rule about revealing your identity in these situations? "Pleased to meet you, Michael. I'm Mary." Our little handshake left me staring blankly at my own palm. After tossing some more crumbs out, she brushed stray morsels off her lap, stood, said goodbye, and finally started along the path toward the rear exit of the park. I tried getting up, but my weak leg had other ideas and made me topple back onto the bench. By the time I'd grabbed my cane, there was only an empty trail pinched between two walls of oak trees in the direction she'd set off. Odd. Back home, my wife, Diana, smoked a cigarette in the kitchen. Her most prominent feature, and the one clearest to me whenever I concentrate extra hard, were the scars along her cheeks and forehead, which became more prominent anytime she lost her temper. Those marks were proudly on display as I rummaged through the fridge for a beer. "Nice walk?" she asked. I didn't answer. "Thought you'd like to know that while you were picnicking, your daughter put a brick through the Armstrongs' greenhouse." She stubbed her cigarette out in an ashtray on the counter. "I'll pay for it," I said. "So I'll just smooth things over with them again, shall I?" Her gravelly voice chased me into the hall, toward the top of the staircase which led to the basement, as she dredged up the same tired argument we'd been having for months on end. "I've got work to do," I finally yelled, before slamming the door behind me. I couldn't really blame her for that reaction. There's only so many times you can stomach the neighbors screaming directly in your face and questioning your parenting abilities. Down in my little office, a cheap monitor displayed the floor plans of a 3-story house, the same kind I hope to live in one day. Open-plan kitchen, glass-fronted bedrooms, the works. All afternoon my eyes strayed toward the bookshelf on my right-hand side, and by nightfall, I'd barely made any progress on the designs. I went upstairs and heated a casserole, which I ate alone. Exactly 1 week later, just as I finished my tea, a familiar voice from behind said, "Why hello again, Michael." It almost caused me to do a cartoon spit take. Clearly, my food poison-induced hallucination theory missed the mark. "The seat taken?" she asked, already circling the bench. I nodded for her to join me. She tossed a handful of breadcrumbs onto the ground, which an army of pigeons quickly seized upon. "So how's you?" I studied her. Those features all looked so real, right down to the freckle on her left ear and the calluses along her fingertips. "I'm good," I said. "Work is a little stressful." "What do you do?" "I'm an architect." "Oh, fantastic." We sat in silence until, with a little snark, she said, "What, who, me?" "Oh, I'm fine, thanks for asking." I forced an awkward and said, "Sorry, how are you?" "I'm grand. Just finished work and thought I'd take advantage of the sunshine." "What do you do?" I asked, like I didn't already know the answer. "I'm a seamstress." "So tell me about yourself. You got a family, kids?" My wedding ring felt suddenly tight just then. "A wife and daughter." "What's your daughter's name?" "Jane. She'll be 9 in May." "Oh, same age as my son, little Mike. Maybe they go to school together." "I don't think so," I answered sharply. She shot me a confused glance before saying, "It's a wonderful age." "Huh?" A slideshow of the endless parent-teacher interviews about my daughter's attitude problems flashed before my eyes. "Definitely. Mike's going through a superhero phase right now. Everything's Batman, Batman, Batman. I'm taking him to that new film tonight." The park and everything in it suddenly dimmed. I clutched the side of the bench, my left thigh throbbing painfully. "Michael," Mary said, alarmed. "Are you okay?" I took several deep, desperate inhales. "I'm fine. Just getting over a nasty virus is all." She placed a soft, reassuring hand against my forehead. For a moment, nothing in this world could have hurt me. A new image flashed before my eyes, me in bed with chickenpox, a thermometer poking from the corner of my mouth. Nearby, Mom sang as she sewed and rocked back and forth in her chair. Every so often, she reached over to brush away the sweaty hairs plastered against my forehead. Mary sat back, her eyes slowly scanning me from head to toe. "Are you sure we haven't met before?" I shook myself alert. "No, and I'm fine." Honestly, my eyes stayed fixed on the light rippling across the surface of the pond. Batman. Why did that strike me as so important? After a few minutes of friendly chatter, Mary got up and started along the path. "Well, nice seeing you again. Batman, Batman, Batman." I snatched my cane and pushed myself up. "Wait." She spun toward me. "What's today's date?" "The 23rd of." She cocked her head to the side. "I've been working so hard I lost track." "June." That meant we were on the same day of the same month. "And the year?" I asked, so embarrassed blood rushed to my face. "Michael, are you sure?" I threw up a hand and forced an awkward laugh. "Just kidding." I could work it out from what she'd already told me. After a cursory glance, she wandered in the direction of the rear exit and then vanished as if engulfed by a heat haze out in the desert. A police car sat parked in my front driveway. After sleepwalking through the inevitable conversation with 2 officers, I repeatedly promised my daughter would receive punishment for the crank calls she'd made. Then I rushed into my office and scanned the bookshelf. On the second row sat a little brown diary with 9798 scribbled along the spine. I flicked it open at a page titled June 23, 1997. Time to scratch the surface of some childhood memories. I just got back from seeing Batman and Robin, and it's probably the second best movie ever next to Terminator 2. I wish Arnold Schwarzenegger was my dad. He had this ice gun that froze people. I wish I had one. I'd use it to freeze Mrs. Silverstone. Isn't it weird how some teachers are out to get you? This one time I really needed to pee, but she wouldn't let me go because I hadn't finished my history exam. I thought about going all over her desk for fun. I suppose I shouldn't write things like that. If Mom finds out, she'll get mad. Anyway, there's no point having a grudge since Mrs. Silverstone is old and will probably die soon. Mom and I had a small popcorn at the cinema. I asked her favorite part of the movie and she said George Clooney. That's the guy who plays Batman. I thought there was a dumb part of the movie to like more than an ice gun. I sank into my leather chair, past events crashing over me like a wave. Mary planned on taking her son to see Batman and Robin on June 23rd, the same day I went as a child. There had to be a perfectly logical explanation for this. Maybe I glimpsed the release date on Wikipedia, and my subconscious filed this information away to use in a stress-induced hallucination. That evening, my wife threw me sour looks from across the table as our daughter made a big show of not eating her beef stew because it tasted worse than pickled dog shit. Well prepared for her next arrival, I asked how Mary was doing before she'd even sat down. "You're in a chipper mood," she said, before making the birds swarm our feed by tossing out breadcrumbs again. I was starting to worry. "You seemed a little zoned out last week." The two of us made idle chatter until, finally, she said, "And how's your daughter? Jane, right?" "She's an angel," I said, through gritted teeth. "You should see Mike these days. Last week I told him we have to buy a new school uniform soon and he threw a big strop. He's been moping about the house ever since." Leg muscles twanging wildly, I reached into my pack and fished out a Batman figurine. Actually, speaking of Mike, I found this the other day. Jane didn't even take it out of the packaging. I thought he might like it instead. Her hands shot up in protest. "Oh no, I couldn't." "You can and you will. It'll only gather dust otherwise." She sighed, clearly touched by the kind gesture. "Thank you. Don't mention it." As the doll passed from my hands to hers, a murmur went up. The park, the bench, and even the trees took a shuddery gasp. My teeth chattered in my skull, but only for a moment. Back home, I rushed into my study, grabbed the diary, and lay it flat on the desk. My hands would not stop shaking. July 28, 1997. I got a new Batman toy. Mom said it's from her friend and that I had to write him a thank you letter. In other news, summer is half over. Mom said we'll need to start buying things for school soon. I told her I wanted a Batman bag to go with my toy, but she said no. It sucks us kids only get 2 months off. Then it's right back to learning boring crap like geography and science. Art is okay though, and I like math sometimes. I got into another fight with Helen. When I showed her my Batman, she said Wonder Woman was better, so I pushed her into the dirt. She ran crying into her house and her mom marched over and told my mom what happened. Then I got grounded for 2 days. Helen is such a stupid crybaby. All girls are. I almost forgot. The other day Mom and I went to see George of the Jungle. It was probably the 4th or 5th best movie ever. It wasn't as good as Batman though. I'm pretty sure Batman could beat both George of the Jungle and Wonder Woman in a fight. Unbelievable. Young Mike had a Batman toy, but I never owned one, did I? Throughout my childhood, every winter, we couldn't afford to put the heating on more than once per day. Outside of birthdays and Christmas, younger me never got toys. Yet, there I was holding evidence to the contrary, and didn't I remember it? Kind of. That summer remained a jangled, foggy mess, hardly surprising, given the circumstances, yet stashed away in some quiet recess of my brain lay an image of Mom walking through the door, hands behind her back, and saying, "I've got a surprise for you." Had I really changed the past? This posed a number of questions, chief among them what to do about the tragic events of August 2nd. I needed to warn her. That day kicked off a downward spiral that ruined both our lives. But this phrase kept turning over in my mind. Butterfly effect. One small change that results in big differences. If I tugged on a 20-year-old thread, what might unravel in the present? I flicked to August 5th, 1997, 3 days after the incident. I am in the hospital and so is Mom. When I woke up, a doctor asked how I was feeling. I told him my leg really hurt. He said I'd lost a pint of blood and asked if I knew how much that was. I said 0.5 liters. The doctor said Mom will be in hospital for a long time, but promised I'll be able to see her soon. I've drawn a picture of us at the beach to cheer her up because that's her favorite place. Even though the events of that night never completely strayed from my subconscious, rereading that entry made my leg feel like an overturned guitar string. From Mom's perspective, she'd have the encounter in exactly 1 week and then spend decades ping-ponging between hospitals and assisted living facilities until she caught pneumonia, developed sepsis as the result of the infection, and finally died. The act of saving her should have been a no-brainer. However, it came with a catch. I opened the diary marked 12/13th. January 15th, 2013. Mom's in the hospital again. I swear, this year it's just been one thing after the other. When all this is over, I'm taking her on holiday. Nothing fancy, maybe a weekend at the seaside to enjoy the scenery. In other news, I saved a life. I was on my way to the hospital when I spotted a car wrapped around a tree at the side of the road. Inside was a lady with so much glass lodged in her head it looked like quills on a porcupine. She had cut on her arm so deep I could actually see bone. Beside her, a gray-haired man lay crushed beneath the dashboard. First thing I did was wrap my shirt around the huge gash on her arm and tie it with my belt. Then I called an ambulance. 2 paramedics rushed her to the same hospital Mom was in. Mom couldn't speak or move, but I held her hand for a few hours, telling her how much I loved her. The nurses said she'd been asking for me right up until they pumped her full of meds. On my way out, I asked about the lady who got in the car accident. When I explained I'd found the wreck, they let me speak with her. Her face was more stitched up than a voodoo doll and she'd clearly been given a mountain of painkillers, but she remembered who I was. Her name was Diana. I offered her my sympathies, then came home. I don't know why I'm writing this rather than going straight to bed. It's been an incredibly long, incredibly shitty day. I sat there, lost in thought. The paramedics told me Diana would have died right alongside her father if I hadn't arrived in time to stifle the bleeding. However, if Mom never got shot and developed a compromised immune system, it's extremely unlikely I'd have been racing along that highway on January 15th. If I don't happen across my future wife, she doesn't survive the crash, then she never comes over to thank me after her recovery. That means the two of us never bond over the shared grief of losing a parent, which in turn means we never raise the little bundle of joy known as Jane. You see my conundrum, but I had to do something. A heartfelt goodbye letter maybe. I didn't sleep that night, or the next one. All week the situation turned over in my mind until, lying beside me in bed, my wife reached over, rubbed my cheek, and said, "You seem more tense than usual." Although strained, our relationship wasn't all arguments and squabbles. The sun did occasionally shine through, usually whenever Jane behaved herself for a period. "I'm fine," I said, eyes glued to the full moon shining through a rickety window. "Just thinking about my mom." Already half asleep, she said, "I wish I could have met her." Cheerful as ever, Mary sat next to me on the bench. Afternoon. Quickly I cleared my throat. "There's something I need to tell you." "Me first." She reached into her purse. "I've got a little gift here." She handed me a card from my past self. It said, "Thank you for the Batman. It's the best present I ever got." Beside the message, he'd drawn a crayon-caped crusader. "That's sweet," I said, dimly recalling the day I wrote it. After a heavy sigh, I made my voice all serious and said, "Mary, please listen. Remember that first time we met, when you said I looked familiar? There's a reason for that." I paused. As the wind gusted, leaves scattered across the ground like lost memories. "This is going to sound crazy, but you're my mother. Have you come down with another fever?" she asked, her eyes narrowing. I waved the suggestion aside. "I can't explain it, but sitting here, this bench, it's like some sort of time bridge. To you it's 1997. But for me it's 2022. When we part ways, I go back to my present, and you go back to yours." She got up to leave. "Nice chatting with you." My arm shots out to snatch her handbag, but she ripped it away then. Now on high alert, she made a desperate break for the path. Unable to catch up, I shouted, "Last week your son pushed Helen over and you grounded him for 2 days. You think he has a crush on her but is too stubborn to admit it." Mary paused mid-step, her back to me. "His favorite film is Terminator 2. His favorite subjects in school are art and math. Everything else, you have to nag him to even glance at his homework." Slowly, she faced me. She studied my eyes, my nose, my lips. Little by little, the realization spread across her face. "Mike." Tears formed at the corner of my eyes as I nodded and said, "It's me." She took several slow steps forward while I held onto the bench, slightly hunched. Her right hand rose up and brushed my cheek, gently. "Mike," she said again. Then, with a furious shake of her head, she backed away. "No," left leg protesting. I fumbled after her, grasping waste bins and tree branches for support along the way. And with every step the world seemed to stretch out like an accordion into one long, endless corridor. Every sound, the birds, the wind, our footsteps, echoed toward a frequency only dogs can hear. Mary kept moving, seemingly unfazed by any of this. Was she even aware? Maybe the past appeared normal from her perspective. Every breath became a battle. It felt like trudging through a bowl of Mom's hearty beef stew. The universe didn't want me chasing her into the past. If I kept on like this, what might happen to me? As one gelatinous step followed another, I flashed back to that awful night. A burglar broke in through the kitchen window right as I wandered downstairs for a glass of water. Mom bolted in, alerted by my screams. Then she and the man fought, going round and round the room before he finally took out his gun and shot her. 6 bullets went into her spine, 1 in the stomach. Somewhere amidst their desperate scramble, my leg got hit, and down I went. Blood pumped out of my left thigh like a furious jet. Within seconds, it coated every surface: the polka dot tablecloth, the cupboard under the sink, the patterned floor tiles. Already on the verge of death, Mom feebly crawled her way into the hallway on her elbows, leaving behind a trail of red. A house phone sat on a side desk in the landing, and when I craned my neck, I just about saw her feebly reel it off the side table by the cord, because she couldn't stand or even lift her arms above her head. "There's something I need to tell you," I rasped at her, back in the park. A desperate lunge brought me close enough to grab her arm. She shrieked. Tremors pulsated through my feet, the vibrations so intense they made my teeth chatter. The universe kept warning me to stop. Would it kill me if I went any further? Only one way to find out. I fumbled through my pocket and pulled out a letter and stuffed it into her handbag. "Read this, it'll explain everything." A giant tremor rippled throughout the world as Mary snatched the bag away. The sudden jerking motion caused me to plunge face first into the dirt, and then I watched helplessly as she scrambled toward the rear gate, glancing back over her right shoulder every so often, eyes big and frightened, until that heat haze took her once again. As I crawled back toward the bench like a commando, that horrible sensory confusion evaporated. Quickly the park compressed back to normal. My lungs opened up. By some miracle, I'd survived. Given the circumstances, I could hardly blame Mom for her reaction. Unfortunately, I'd likely torpedoed any chance of her reading my letter. Hell, she'd probably suspect I laced the envelope with anthrax. Now I'd never get that goodbye. I returned home in a trance, only snapping alert when I walked up the driveway and saw the house I grew up in had magically acquired an extra story since I'd departed. Glass-fronted bedrooms now faced out onto the street. After double-checking the address, I hurried through the door, into the kitchen, and gasped at the sight of 2 strangers, a woman and a girl, at the side of a kitchen island. Every surface had a gray granite finish. I watched the pair roll out dough. A moment later, the sweet aroma of chocolate, butterscotch, and brown sugar hit my nostrils. That woman's blonde hair and green eyes struck me as familiar, but from where? "Everything okay, Han?" the woman asked. Her voice immediately uncorked my memory. She was what I imagined a grown-up version of Helen might look like. Beside her, propped up on a little plastic stool, stood a 9-year-old girl, roughly my daughter's age. They looked quite similar, too, except she had Helen's nose rather than my wife's. Before I could ask what they were doing in my house, my eye happened across a photo on the wall, me and the woman cutting a wedding cake, both grinning like a pair of lovesick teenagers. As the room swayed from side to side, I staggered around, only now realizing I'd left my cane at the park. The girl looked up at me with her big green eyes and said, "We're making chocolate chip cookies, Daddy." Unsure what to say, I fumbled my way toward the counter and wiped a smidge of butter off her cheek. "Real. This was all real. Everything okay, Han?" Helen asked. She cleaned her hands using the front of her apron and then pressed one of them against my forehead. "You look a little flush. Just tired is all," I rasped. "Maybe you should lie down." In a minute, I practically flew downstairs. My office looked much tidier than when I left that morning. Architecture awards and framed articles about my latest projects decorated the walls, and a top-of-the-range iMac sat on the desk. I grabbed the diary marked 9697th off the shelf. Now there was an entry marked August 2nd, 1997. Today was a good day. Mom said we were going on an adventure and took me to the beach. We built sandcastles, and when the tide came in, we went for fish and chips. We ate by the sea, and every time I threw a chip away, a whole flock of seagulls fought over it. Afterward, we checked into a hotel. Mom says it's important to treat yourself and have a little fun sometimes. I'm so tired I can barely keep my eyes open, so now I'm going to bed. I sat back, flabbergasted. I'd done it. I'd successfully changed the past. Now I didn't marry Diana. I married the girl next door instead. But wasn't that how it always went? Hadn't the story of our relationship already embedded itself inside my skull? My former spouse and daughter quickly became quiet echoes, their faces distant blurs. From the top of the stairs, Helen creaked open the door and shouted down, "Don't forget your mother's coming over for dinner tonight." My heart soared. She'd survived. My former daughter was gone, but hadn't I still rescued Diana? Hadn't I warned Mom a lady needed rescuing one night in the distant future? Or had I considered that change too big a risk? After all, the universe clearly didn't like me playing God. Things were still deeply convoluted. Two sets of conflicting memories occupied headspace, but piece by piece, I felt the old ones dissolve. Fortunately, I had the diaries. My life story was just sitting there, itching to be read. They hide in the light. Oliver, can you please turn off the lights downstairs? I remember being a kid and hearing these words. I dreaded them. It was my job in the family to turn the lights off downstairs, to be the one that welcomes darkness into a familiar space, to have it chase me up the stairs. Darkness cannot chase, but that's what it felt like. I remember being relieved when I arrived at my room. I felt like I had won a race, one that you needed to win. I felt safe in my room, the constant reassurance of the lights telling my eyes that there is no danger nearby, the lack of shadows to hide in, the doors and walls keeping me safe. But I really shouldn't have felt safe at all. You wonder why you only see these monsters in the dark, why you only become aware of them in the dark. I have learned that in the same way we hide in the shadows, the light is their shadow to hide in. To wait, and one day it stopped waiting. I grew up in a 2-story house with my sister and my parents, your typical American family home. There was nothing particularly special with the house or the area. We were a niche neighborhood, and we knew everyone in it. Everyone was so friendly, you felt safe enough to not lock your doors at night. Then things changed, subtly at first. In hindsight, these were warnings that I now try to tell you. It started with small noises, a constant scratching of my bedroom window I had told myself was just the nearby tree, the continuous, almost rhythmic creaks of the attic floor above, a random rattle of the closet doors. These noises felt far away and never really interfered with normal life. It continued for about 3 months before it started to become more than just noise. First, leaky faucets. The house now had a permanent stench of offness, then doors opening on their own, even locked ones. A blanket of sorrow seemed to engulf what once was my happy family, and for no apparent reason either. The sounds had also gotten closer. At this point, the creaks now originated from right beside my bed. The scratching on the window got louder, and one day I noticed visible scratch marks. They had come from the inside. My parents were not superstitious. They believed that everything had a logical and rational explanation. When I told them about all of this, they had disregarded it as my imagination. "Oliver, can you please turn off the lights downstairs?" This was the night that it stopped waiting, and I remember it vividly. That night, I headed towards the lights and braced myself to sprint before I flicked the switch. Ready, set, flick. I dashed up the stairs, straight to my room with the familiar relieved feeling of having won the race again. I settled in to relax on my bed, to read a comic or two before falling asleep. "Ollie, please, can you turn off the lights downstairs? You'll rack up a bill." "Mom, I just turned them off. Sophie probably went downstairs or something." "Ollie, Sophie's in our room. I know you're scared of the dark, but please don't lie to me. Now to your job, please." I reluctantly opened the door to my safe haven and headed toward the light switch downstairs again. I figured it was just an electricity issue. Ready, set, flick. I dashed up the stairs, but before I could close the door to my room, I heard a familiar click downstairs. The lights were on again, but so was the kitchen faucet. Dad, there's someone downstairs." I usually called for my dad whenever I was afraid. He always showed me that there was nothing to be afraid of. I remember him coming out of his room a bit annoyed as I had interrupted his work, but he put on a comfort face once he realized I was scared shitless. "It's all right, Ollie. Look, no one's downstairs. I'll check it for you." I watched him go downstairs, then out of sight as he went to investigate. I waited for what seemed like forever, just staring at the stairs, waiting for my dad to say that everything was all right. Then the faucet turned off, and he had arrived at the light switch placed so conveniently near the base of the stairs. "Nothing here, Ollie. Someone just forgot to turn off the kitchen tap." He turned off the lights and walked upstairs to comfort me. Relief was overwhelming. Click. The buzz of lights seemed to have gotten louder, as if to mock how futile our attempts were at turning them off. Wait here, Ollie. I just need to check the electrical board. I watched my dad go down the steps again, each foot making that familiar thump on the stairs. Then my dad stopped midway. His head turned to look at me, and he was looking at me funny. I remember his face vividly. It was a mixture of shock and intense sorrow. His body was still facing the base of the stairs. His neck was facing the wrong way. And just like that, he was dead. The following thumps of his body falling are still etched into my mind. Ollie, is everything all right? My mother was once a bright and bubbly person. The moment she stepped out and saw my dad is when the light in her extinguished. Her screams were cut short by the lights downstairs. They had switched back off. This revealed the darkness that had done this to Dad. It was just vaguely humanoid, only a silhouette, and walking up the stairs. Their walk was almost in an awkward slow motion, as if it knew it'd get me eventually, and I somehow knew there was no escaping it. My mother had other plans. She snatched me into her room, hid Sophie and I in the bathtub, and called the police. My father's cause of death was officially labeled as a stairway accident. It was the most obvious answer. After all, 12,000 people die of stairway accidents a year. This was all 31 years ago, and I am now 45. My mother, my sister, they were both killed in a similar fashion. My mother's was a bathtub slip. My sister's was a bed fall. But I knew better. I have survived this long because I have learned that these creatures cannot hurt you in the dark. Similar to how you cannot see them in the light, they cannot see you in the dark. Which is why I have lived the past 25 years in darkness, living with the sight of these creatures in exchange for their sight of me. As long as you are dead silent, you will live to see another day. I write this because I am tired of living in the dark. I write this to warn you of my story, to look out for the signs that you or your family have been marked, the signs that they have gotten tired of waiting. I will turn on my lights now. We have been receiving Morse code from the Mariana Trench, and I wish we didn't. Don't come down here, don't come down here, don't come down here, don't. This message was repeatedly sent out in a way none of us would have ever expected. This message was sent out a couple of times a month and would last a little over 3 hours. We were absolutely astonished to discover this message was being sent from the bottom of the Mariana Trench. Some of you reading this might be curious about what exactly the Mariana Trench is. For those who do not know, the Mariana Trench is the deepest known part of the ocean, stretching down 7 miles. It's rather quite fascinating since there are plenty of mysteries to what is down there. Some people believe there are to be creatures of unknown horror waiting down below in it. One of my personal favorites is the anglerfish. Around about a year ago, we started receiving signals from somewhere at the bottom of the trench stating "don't come down here" on repeat. This MSG would only be sent out a couple of times a month for about a little over 3 hours. These messages did not change though, and we watched for a couple of months because we didn't know how to handle the situation. That was until something came to the surface. A metal ball came up above. We sent out a team to go investigate and retrieve the unknown object. To our amazement, it was a capsule. Inside contained a radio mechanism, which we believed to be sending out the signal. This discovery was amazing to us. We had never been able to send anything down to the bottom of the trench. The material this ball was made out of was an absolute breakthrough to all of us. Its ability to withstand pressure was mind-blowing. It kept any object from inside from being affected. We ended up calling this EE. This wasn't the only one that we found that had reached the surface of the water. We had a team specialized in collecting EE. Our plan was to find a way to send something down there to maybe communicate to whoever was ever sending these messages, or at least provide us with video evidence of what's down there. Our thoughts were that if the messages were telling us to not go down there, we should send down some sort of machine that would be able to scan the area of the bottom of the trench, because if something was safe to go up, we assumed it would be safe to send back down. It took us a couple of months to actually make a machine that would be able to send us video from all the way down there, and to make sure there were ways to communicate back to anything if we found any signs of intelligent life, which shouldn't be a problem since we were being communicated to first. We loaded the machine onto a ship and everyone got ready to see what was down there. We waited for the time that the original balls rose to the surface before sending them down. We assumed there could be some problems since it was only happening a couple of times a month. We were taking every precaution since EE could only be found through the balls rising to the surface. It took a couple of days to be absolutely sure since most of the team were skeptical and believed that sending something down there could awaken something that we were not supposed to see. Threats from the higher-ups made them reconsider their beliefs on the subject. After that, we were ready to send it down. It had a built-in camera that was able to see through the material since it was almost see-through. We sat in our boat watching monitors showing the images being received from the device. A member of the crew dropped it into the water, starting descent on this 7-mile journey. We watched as we made it past 1,000 meters, then 2,000, 3,000, 4,000, and so on. We discovered that the trench was way deeper than anyone could have ever imagined. Nothing crazy started happening. We did see what appeared to be fish we hadn't discovered yet that fascinated us. They appeared to look like giant snakes with fins and could be found 20 meters down. They didn't pay any mind to us, which didn't come to us as a surprise though, since objects similar to ours have been reaching the surface frequently. Besides that, there was nothing out of the ordinary. That wasn't until we made it past 50 meters. We lost all visuals until we reached about 90 meters. The audio we received though was incredibly strange. We could hear some type of unknown creature swimming all around the machine, and what could only be described as loud screeches and roars. When we did finally get back on our visuals, all we could see were massive creatures. They were too far out of view due to the limited distance we could see while we descended. Once we started seeing these creatures, a good chunk of the crew that was skeptical in the first place and didn't want to go down there were granted permission to leave. Who could actually blame them? We were above all of them like sitting ducks. We didn't know anything having to do with the nature of these creatures. We were only ever able to get a good look at some sort of eyeball that was blinking off in the distance. It was massive. We were fascinated and wanted to get a better look, but we were afraid if we went any closer to it, our mission would fail if it attacked the machine, making our time going down a waste of time. 95,000 meters, 100,000 meters. We reached 100 meters. We were amazed at how deep the trench actually was, way deeper than anyone could have ever expected. We were so excited until we all stopped and noticed a light. It was so bright. We went closer and closer to it until we broke through it. It was the surface that was unthinkable. How could we have reached the surface? One of the crew members we got to check to see if it was outside, because from what we could see was our boat. He quickly came back to let us know that nothing was there. We had already realized this because where he would have been able to see the machine, we would have been also able to see him. The machine began to shake and the visuals turned off. All we could hear were the sounds of some creature screeching, a sound of an alarm, and a voice. This voice came from what sounded to be some sort of speaker. You should have listened. There is nothing we can do to help you now. After that, we lost all connection with the machine, but just beforehand a mass signal came from it that we managed to receive. It stated, "We told you to not come down here. There is nothing we can do for you." They didn't know it was that deep. "We can't help you now." We had no idea what this message meant for us. We didn't know that the trench was that deep. Our group has been stationed farther away from the trench, but we have been receiving distorted audio of what sounds like screeching from deep within the trench. But the sound has been growing louder by the day. I wish we didn't receive those messages. I know nothing but that I'm afraid. My drive home was 3 hours too short. Now I'm worried this isn't my real home. It was a gloomy day and I had to make the 4-hour trip back to the province. I moved out of the city last year, where I was born and raised, to a province that, although new to me, seemed like a sensible option. It's quieter, less crowded, less stressful. I work remotely anyway, so all I need is a decent internet connection and I'll be fine. On my way to my car, tiny drips of rain had started, although not enough to need an umbrella. On the expressway, however, the rain had gotten much heavier. Despite my wipers giving it their all, the road ahead remained a smudged blur. The sky was a flat white gray, with tree silhouettes breaking through the monotony every few meters. Apparently, admiring a Monet painting is far more enjoyable than driving through one. It's 3 in the afternoon, but visibility is quickly dwindling. An hour into the drive, and I can vaguely make out silhouettes of cars. Underneath them were nothing but white clouds of rain spatters. I was getting nervous. I had drinks with my best friend the night before and my anxiety is shooting through the roof. This was expected. It has been a pattern I've observed following alcohol overconsumption. I still indulge in it every now and then since I don't see my friends as often as when I lived in the city. But I have to admit that this bitch of a rainstorm coupled with that fact is a terrible combination. I decided that as soon as I find the emergency parking, I'll pull over to the side, carefully, lest I skid out of control or get run over by oncoming traffic. Luckily, all cars have turned their lights on, and the usual speeds have slowed down from the usual 80 to 100 range. I finally made it to the side of the road, and right on time, too. The rains got heavier and heavier and heavier. I wondered how anyone could drive under these conditions, or whether anyone was driving at all. I can no longer see even the taillights through the white misty haze. I must have dozed off because the next thing I know, the rain had completely stopped and it was dark. But what I can't account for is that I am parked, not on the side of the expressway, but in a small clearing among some trees. I rubbed my eyes and saw a very familiar sight. I eventually realized I was on the rough road right outside my new provincial property. I was home and severely disoriented. How did I get here now when there were still 3 hours left of my drive? Did I go on autopilot? Was I still drunk? Despite my confusion, my desire to get my feet off the pedal and on the couch won. I figured I can worry about that 3-hour blackout or autopilot or whatever the hell it was later, in front of the TV perhaps. I walked in and saw my helpers about 100 meters off, doing some work clearing some overgrown grass, a bit of chatter amongst themselves. I thought it was odd for them to be working so late in the day. I carried on walking towards my cabin. I've planted plenty of tree seedlings all over, hoping to reforest the area, which is nicely situated by the foot of a small sleepy hill. I smelled the freshly cut grass and fresh breeze. It was a really good change of environment, especially for someone coming from the crowded, polluted city. My pleasant thoughts were interrupted by the sound of footsteps running towards my direction on the grass. I turned my head. Everything was the same, except that the group of helpers seemed about 10 meters closer to me than when I last looked. Their chatter had paused for a second before starting again. My eyes are tired and have never been that reliable in the dark. Anyway, I turned to continue my walk towards the cabin. There it was again, the sound of running in the grass. This time their lively chatter seemed to have evolved into malevolent whispers behind my back. I turned again. Despite having walked a few steps away from them, they still seemed to have gotten a few meters closer to my location. This is silly, I thought. How would that happen, and what for? I turned my head away again. The sound of running came, the malevolent whispers hurrying closer. At the count of 5, I turned my head back around. They still had their backs on me. The whispers had stopped. But this time, they were a mere 30 meters away from where I stand. Are these guys pulling a prank on me? And how are they able to get so far, so fast? I don't understand what's going on, but I definitely don't like it. What happens when they get to where I am? I don't want to find out. I couldn't feel my hands at this point, only the throbbing heartbeat in my throat. I turned my body completely towards them, facing them as I slowly walked backwards towards the cabin, keeping my eyes on them the whole time. I made it to the foot of the stairs and groped my way up the building. I shut the door while still staring at them through the glass. They haven't come closer and they eventually started dispersing. Some went to the kitchen, east of my cabin, while the others went into their huts to rest. This brings us to where I am now. It's been several hours since I got here. It's 2 a.m. and I can't sleep. The night has gone darker, and the lights have gone out. Although I can't see out in the darkness surrounding my cabin, I hear their menacing whispers at the foot of the stairs. I don't want to close my eyes in fear of finding them hovering right above me when I wake up. I'm starting to get the feeling that although everything looks like my house, that I somehow made it to the wrong home. And it's been made apparent to me that I am not welcome here. I've double locked the door and made sure all windows are tightly shut. I have my back up against the wall, my eyes fixed on the door, metal baton in hand. My plan is to wait for daybreak. I'll take my car back to the expressway to redo the drive, and be sure to make the full 4-hour trip. When I was a kid, my mom used to play with the lights. Even though I was just a little kid, I still found it unsettling. It was always at night, always when I should have been sleeping. Many nights, if I opened my door a crack and looked out to the living room, there she would be. She'd stand facing the window with her back to me and her hand on the light switch. Up, down, up, down, up, down. Sometimes, there were pauses that made it seem like there was some sort of pattern. Other times, my mom would simply flip the light switch wildly with a madness in her eyes, a madness I'd watch reflected in the glass. She caught me watching her once. I remember it vividly. She turned and smiled warmly. "Honey, you should be sleeping." She bent and ran her fingers through my hair. "It's okay. Go back to bed, sweetheart." And I knew that whatever it was far from okay. I was an only child, and it was just the 3 of us. My mom and dad moved a lot when I was growing up, but this slowed around the time I turned 9. That's when Mom got her own special room. When Dad stapled dark, squishy styrofoam to the walls of a spare bedroom, we'd moved to some dizzyingly high apartment building, 30 stories up or more. Looking back, the walls were water-stained and roaches ran when you turned on the lights, but to 9-year-old me it was a palace where my ears popped in the elevator. I mostly remember my mother as being sweet, while I always remember my father as a silently furious man. It was as if he held his entire body white-knuckled. Teeth and muscles alike were held so tight I wouldn't be surprised to hear them crack or tear. There were a lot of things that stressed Dad out. One of them was Uncle Damien. He'd only come when Dad wasn't home, and he and Mom would whisper at the kitchen table. A couple times, Dad had found out that Damien had been over. He got somehow even madder than his resting rage and tore into my mother with a fury. Then there was the murder. I blamed myself for a long time. The signs were there, but as you'll come to see, what was a kid to do? My mom was black and blue, but still, she'd look out into the neighborhood below, and flipped the light switch frantically. The police station smelled of brewing coffee and the musk of wet human. My nostrils flared as I folded my umbrella and stomped my boots on the black entrance mat. Luckily, I didn't have to wait. As soon as I said my name at the counter, a detective ushered me around the corner and into a well-lit office. He shut the door and we both sat. "I've got it right here," he said as he pushed over a pink journal. There was a brass clasp where it looked like a little lock had been sawn away. "Rachel McCann's diary." I reached towards the notebook but paused. "May I?" He nodded. "Fell to where it's dog-eared. That's where this all starts." I did as he said, and I read. March 24th, 2008. Someone in the Williams building is flashing their lights at night. I saw them flashing 3 nights ago and again tonight. I told Daddy, but he didn't see it. He missed it. He says it's probably just a kid like me messing around. But I don't think so. 10:12. Both times I've checked the time when the lights were flashing, and it was 10:12. If there are 14 minutes in a day, the odds of that happening twice are 1 in 14, or something like that. Daddy thinks it's just a coincidence, but he hasn't even seen them flash. March 25th, 2008. They're flashing right now. As I write this, the Williams building towers over our house, but I can still see someone standing in front of the window as they flash the lights. It's 10:30 and the flashing has stopped. It didn't start at 10:12 tonight, so maybe Daddy is right. But I don't think it's a kid. The person I saw looked like a grown-up. Daddy said the flashing could be some kind of code, like Morse code. He's not curious about the flashing like I am, but he said he'd still teach me to understand code. March 29th, 2008. Morse code is not that hard. The dots are when the lights flash and when they stay on for a pause. That's a dash. I realized watching videos that the flashing in the window might be too fast for me to understand though, but I think I know enough to at least tell if the flashing is actually code or not. Now I'm just waiting for the lights to flash again. It's been 4 days and no flash. The next entry didn't have a date. It started with a series of dots and dashes. Morse code, I realized. There are 3. It's been flashing, and I know what they're saying. I couldn't get it all, not even close. It flashes too fast. But I got the end. They said in code that there are 3. I'm trying to figure out what that means. Maybe it means they're being held prisoner by 3 people. I think it might be someone that needs help. They're sending Morse code and I'm the only one seeing it. But I haven't seen the signal for sauce. If I do, I'll tell Mom and Dad. Maybe I can save this person. The rest of the page was filled with more dots and lines. I suck at Morse code. It's the middle of the night now. I woke up and saw the lights flashing again. I tried to write the flashing as Morse code, but it must be wrong. It's going too fast. The words are, the writing stopped and continued on the line below. I'm not a scaredy cat, but it's late and something is wrong. I heard a shout downstairs. I can't bring myself to leave my room. I'm hiding under my bed like a little girl. I can still see from here. The lights are flashing slower. The message is repeating. There were more dots and dashes. The ink was smudged as if Rachel had been written furiously. This can't be right. The flashing lights. They're not in trouble. They're talking about me. She's under the bed. That has to be about me. The lights aren't flashing anymore. The person at the window, they're just staring at me now. There must have been a pause before the last sentence was written. The words were separated from the rest of the text. Small and written slightly sideways it read, "That's not Daddy's voice." I leaned back and shivered. The detective spun the journal on the desk, so it faced him. We interviewed the occupants of every south-facing apartment in the Williams Tower, but we found no leads. "You're saying your mother would frequently flash the lights?" I ignored him, lost in my own head. "What happened to the girl?" I asked. The detective frowned. "You don't know. I mean, I do. She was found killed the morning after this was written. Her parents, too. But how'd she die?" The detective raised his eyebrows, scratched his cheek with a thumb. "The parents' throats were torn open. The coroner said the cuts were so dull it was like an animal had done it. And the girl, her nose and mouth were sewn shut. She suffocated, and some of her skin was sewn too, like surgical scars. But can you tell me more about your mother? We believe that whoever killed the McCann family was getting assistance from the person that was signaling with the light. The south-facing apartments of the tower have an excellent view of the house. Can you tell me where your mother is now?" I never could remember Uncle Damien's face. My mom turned off the lights when he visited, but when I heard the detective say Rachel's skin was sewn, an image shuttled back into my mind. I saw Damien's mouth closed with a black slit of sewing thread. His clothes were made of an ugly beige leather, like skin, stitched together. He would do her bidding. My dad told me drunk one night when I was only a kid That thing that comes and sees your mother when I'm away. It's not your uncle, it's a demon. I locked her away, and still, she uses the lights to talk with it now. Hello, the detective yelled. Anybody home? I shook with a start. Sorry, I stood abruptly, leaving. This is still a murder investigation. You have to tell me about your mother. You should know, detective. She's dead, I said, and practically ran from the room. That night I stood in my kitchen and poured a drink with a shaking hand. A pen and a single sheet of college-ruled paper sat on the counter. I didn't know what to make of it all. In my early teens, the newlyweds down the block were found murdered, and my parents and I were moving across the country again. My father was screaming at my mother, asking her what she'd done. I remember my dad pulling into a gas station. His face was bleeding from where my mom scratched him. He reached across the tiny backseat, opened my door from the inside, and pushed me out. With tears in his eyes, he looked at me and told me he loved me. Then he stomped the gas pedal. The car was a dot in the distance when I saw it swerve into the oncoming lane. When I caught up with the car, I could see the black shadows of my parents' bodies still burning in their seats. Maybe my mother hit the wheel, but really I know my dad took things into his own hands to keep her from hurting anyone else. I had put these demons in the past, buried them, but what led me to the police station and down memory lane in the first place was what I saw now. What I've seen the last 3 nights in a row, out the window, in an apartment building a few blocks down. Lights are flashing in a single window. A man has been walking down the dark street below. His mouth is a tight line. I swear I can see the sewing thread from here. I know who it is. I know it's Damien because I've already translated what the flashes say. It's a command. It's written on the paper on the counter. So, his skin. Thank you guys for watching. If you enjoyed these stories, then hit the like. See you guys next time.